The late-morning hum of Oak Ridge Diner was as steady as the clink of coffee cups and the shuffle of plates across worn counters. It was the kind of place where the vinyl booths had lost their shine but not their sturdiness, and where the jukebox in the corner still held songs no one had played in decades. For most people, the air buzzed with comfort and nostalgia. For Grant Whitmore, seated stiffly in a corner booth, it was just noise. Noise that rattled against his ribs and reminded him of how hollow life had felt since his wife was gone. Across the table, his son Evan sat with his head tilted toward the tabletop. The boy's small fingers tapped a rhythm only he seemed to understand. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, repeating with mechanical precision. Evan's shoulders barely moved, his gaze locked on the formica surface. 10 years old, and yet he seemed to inhabit a world sealed tight, unreachable. Nye Grant, accustomed to commanding boardrooms with a glance, felt that familiar pinch of helplessness. He had poured wealth into every possible remedy. Specialists, private schools, therapy sessions that cost more than some families' yearly income. None had unlocked the silence. The boy remained a fortress. He tried to speak, his voice low and edged with authority. "Evan, eat your food." The command was as flat as the untouched plate of pancakes before the child. No answer came. The tapping continued. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. The waitress appeared at the side of their booth, her apron dusted with powdered sugar from the breakfast rush. Clara Jensen. Grant barely glanced at her at first. To him, she was another face in an endless stream of service staff, nameless people who filled the background of his busy life. Her tone, however, broke through the din. "Everything all right here, sir?" she asked, her voice even, but carrying a warmth the room itself seemed to lack. Fine," Grant answered shortly, his eyes flicking toward her only long enough to discourage further conversation. He expected her to leave, to melt back into the flow of clattering trays. Instead, Clara's attention shifted to Evan. Her brow softened as she watched the boy's fingers drumming. "That's an interesting beat," she said gently. Grant nearly scoffed. Interesting? It was a symptom, another reminder of the gap between them. He opened his mouth to correct her, but something unexpected happened. Evan's fingers faltered. The break was so slight, anyone else might have missed it. But Grant had lived these silences long enough to recognize the shift. For his son, a pause was seismic. Evan tilted his head, eyes flickering sideways toward the sound of Clara's voice. She smiled, crouching slightly so her face was near his line of sight without demanding it. "It sounds a little like a song," she added. Her own fingers found the edge of the table. She began tapping, not copying his rhythm, but weaving a softer counterbeat, a harmony to his solitary drumming. At first Evan hesitated, his blue eyes darting between her hand and his own. Then his fingers adjusted, reshaping their cadence to meet hers. A dialogue unfolded, silent yet alive, a language built not from words but from rhythm. Grant felt his breath catch in his throat. For 2 years since Margaret's passing, his household had been defined by absence, empty halls, hushed meals, a boy adrift in silence. Now in this unremarkable diner, a stranger had coaxed a spark of connection from Evan, without effort, without money, without any of the things he had tried to buy. Of taps filled the small space between them, fragile yet undeniable. Evan's eyes, so often locked inward, rose for the first time in weeks. He looked at Clara, directly. It wasn't long, just a glance, but for Grant it was a miracle. Clara's smile widened but held no triumph, only wonder. "He's got music in him," she whispered as though revealing a secret too precious to be spoken aloud. Grant, a man who moved billions with a signature, sat frozen. His chest tightened with something unfamiliar, a tremor of hope buried under years of grief. He stared at Clara, trying to reconcile what had just happened. Who was this young woman with the patient eyes and steady hands? And how had she reached his son in the span of a few moments when the best experts in the country had failed? Evan tapped once more, softly, then stopped. He sat still, but the air around him seemed lighter. Grant found himself staring at Clara, his thoughts colliding in disbelief. Who was she? Recipe over the diner door gave a tired jingle as Grant Whitmore stepped in again, the kind of sound that belonged to a slower world. He paused long enough to spot the same corner booth, then spoke to the hostess in a measured tone. "Is Clara working today?" It wasn't a question so much as an arrangement. The hostess blinked, surprised, then nodded toward the coffee station. "I'll let her know, sir." Grant guided Evan into the booth. The boy slid in without looking up, tracing a fingertip along the seam in the tabletop as if following a map only he could see. Grant set a napkin down and aligned the silverware in a neat row. Order was easier than connection. It was the one thing he could buy, organize, and control. Clara arrived with 2 waters and a quiet smile that didn't push. "Good to see you both again," she said. "Would you like the same drinks?" Her glance softened when it landed on Evan. "Morning, buddy." Evan didn't respond, but he reached for the paper-wrapped straw and carefully peeled it, letting the crinkled paper fall into a small spiral. He touched the spiral once, twice, as if making sure it would stay. "Black coffee," Grant said, "and orange juice for him if you don't mind." He sounded like a man placing a bid, precise, clipped, already calculating the next step. Clara took the order, then stayed.
"How's your day going so far?"
"Busy," he answered, then realized that wasn't an answer anyone in here needed. He cleared his throat. "Thank you for the other day." It felt odd, stringing gratitude into words.
"He reacted. I noticed."
Her face lit with something like relief. He did. He was listening.
Listening. The words settled over the table.
Grant had paid a fortune to be told about developmental milestones and therapeutic goals. The plainness of listening felt almost old-fashioned, like a recommendation to try fresh air. Clara poured water, then set the pitcher aside.
"You don't have to say anything,"
she added.
"Just being here matters."
Being here. That was the part Grant had never learned to purchase. "I'd like to discuss something," he said, adjusting his cuff as if it were a contract.
"I want to hire you."
Clara blinked.
"Hire me?"
"To be with Evan."
He kept his voice level.
"Not just at the diner, to accompany him, help him. Whatever the title is, it's yours. You'd be compensated very well." He named a number that made the waitress at the next station bump a cup against a saucer. Clara didn't look at the number. She looked at Evan, twisting the straw paper into a ring. "Mr. Whitmore, I work here and I'm in school. Special education. That number is generous, but I'm not—" She searched for a word that would be kind. "For sale." He'd expected resistance, but not that shape. "I don't mean it like that. I'm trying to solve a problem." Flushing tilted her head. "What problem do you hear when you listen to him?" Opened his mouth and found only portfolio answers. Access, outcomes, metrics. He closed it again. "He can't reach people," he said at last, "or people can't reach him." Clara nodded. "Sometimes we ask a door to open the wrong way." She tapped the table once, gently, then stopped so Evan could decide whether to answer. He didn't. She left the rhythm alone. "I care about him, but what happened last time wasn't a trick. It wasn't a method. It was a moment. I can create more of those moments," Grant said quickly. Offers were how he moved through the world. A schedule, consistency. If you need a car, I'll provide it. If tuition is— She raised a hand, not rudely, but with the simple authority of someone who has carried heavy trays through tight aisles for years. "Mr. Whitmore, I appreciate the offer, truly, but I don't think money is the bridge you're looking for." Porras passed behind her with a plate of bacon that scented the air. The jukebox coughed up a soft old tune. Clara waited until the noise settled. "May I suggest something else? Come to lunch, here. Put your phone away, be here with him. That's the condition." Unleashed stared at her. He thought of the way his life was built. Meetings, stacked like bricks. a phone that hummed with decisions before breakfast, an assistant trained to hand him escape routes. "You want me to eat lunch with your son," she said it. "If he's done after 10 minutes, you're done after 10 minutes. If he wants to line up sugar packets by color, you line them up, and notice which color comes first. That's the work." He almost laughed, and something in him almost broke. That isn't a plan. It's a presence. She folded her order pad, keeping her voice low so the boy beside them would not feel observed. "When you pay me to be with him, you're outsourcing what he needs most. He needs you." Evans separated the spiral into 2 smaller pieces and placed them side by side, perfectly parallel. He pressed each one with a fingertip, then looked at his father's hand, not his face, just the hand, and nudged the nearer paper toward him. Grant didn't know what to do with paper spirals. He knew where to put capital, where to put influence, where to put fear. He reached anyway and steadied the tiny coil with a forefinger. It trembled, then settled. For a heartbeat, the 3 of them were bound by a silence that did not feel empty. Clara exhaled, as though that small steadiness had been the answer to a question. "I can check on you both when I'm on shift," she said. "If you want to talk about strategies, I can share what I'm learning in school, but I won't be a wall you stand behind. He deserves to know his father is on his side in the open." Hand on the table, at the way his expensive cuff set off against the cheap paper. His instinct flickered. Raise the offer, sweeten the pot, bring the conversation back to terms. "If the condition is lunch," he said slowly, tasting the unfamiliar weight of the words, "then the condition is accepted." Clara's smile was not very kind. "Good, I'll bring the juice." She turned to go, and Grant felt a sensation he hadn't let near him in years. The slight, unsettling tug of being told no by someone who wanted the best for him. He watched her move through the aisle, weaving past other tables, unhurried, unafraid to leave a billionaire with nothing to bargain but himself. He glanced at Evan. The boy slid 1 paper spiral closer and kept the other for his own side of the table. 2 small circles in quiet company. For the first time in a long while, Grant wasn't sure how to proceed. And underneath that uncertainty, something else stirred, a prickle of challenge that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with presence. Grant sat across from his son and did not reach for his phone. It rested in his jacket like a small stubborn habit, warm against his ribs, pulsing with the faintest vibration every so often, as if reminding him that the rest of his life was elsewhere. He kept his hand on the table instead, palm open, watching Evan breathe. The diner's noon crowded thickened. Forks chimed, a coffee pot hissed, someone fed a quarter to the jukebox, and a shy old tune rose up, thin as sunlight through blinds. The air smelled of butter and pepper, and something sweet cooling in the kitchen. It was the kind of day when ordinary felt like mercy. Clara slid into their orbit with the grace of someone who had learned to read a room before she could drive. "Good to see you both," she said softly. She set down water for Evan first, then for Grant. "Want to try the grilled cheese today? We can cut it into triangles." Flushed Evan's eyes moved to the glass, then to the paper-wrapped straw. He pinched the end and drew the paper back in a slow sheath, the spiral loosening like a white fern. Grant watched, resisting the instinct to narrate, to direct. The boy lined the paper coil next to the salt shaker and pressed it once, satisfied. "Triangles," Grant said, uncertain whether he was helping. He might. No, Clara nodded but didn't take the suggestion as a command. "Triangles are friendly," she told Evan, as if sharing a secret between co-conspirators. "Squares are bossy. Triangles make good sales." She didn't ask a question he would have to answer. She filled the silence with a story the way you tuck a blanket around a sleeping child. The phone nudged again. He could picture the screen without looking, a stack of messages, a calendar tile blinking red. He slid the device deeper into the pocket and pressed his elbow against it, as if pinning a restless bird. Wilmington came. Clara didn't set the plate directly in front of Evan. She laid it on the empty space between them and pointed to the golden halves like a museum guide. "We can make a path," she said, moving the first triangle so its point faced the second, then another forming a crooked little road. She added a handful of fries, straight as matchsticks, to make rails. "Do you want to help me build a track?" Minimized leaned closer. His fingers hovered, retreated, returned. He adjusted one fry by a hair's breadth, eyes narrowing in concentration. Grant felt the smallest relief, nearly invisible, like a knot loosening behind his collarbone. Clara folded a napkin into a sail and anchored it with a sugar packet. "If the ship sails down the track," she murmured, "it has to stop at the lighthouse." She took a tiny ramekin of ketchup and set it at the end, then dipped the tip of one fry and drew a red dot. Careful, no mess. There, a light. Evan's mouth parted. He pinched another fry, dipped, dotted. 2 lights. He lined them up exactly, then glanced at her hand, not her face. She didn't crowd him. She stayed at the edge of his field, steady as a shoreline. Grant's fingers flexed against the table. He had spent years buying solutions, weighing outcomes, demanding progress. Here, progress looked like ketchup dots and a small boy arranging rails with monkish attention. He felt foolish for not knowing that this could be enough. "Mr. Whitmore," Clara said, bringing his coffee, "would you like to place the train?" He caught himself and let the question soften. She held up a short, thick fry. "The engine," she said. He took it between thumb and forefinger. Evan watched the movement as if observing a delicate experiment. Grant set the engine at the start of the track. It wobbled and he steadied it gently. Evan slid a triangle half-inch forward so the point met the fry with precise satisfaction. The boy's shoulders lowered by a fraction. Clara let out a breath, the kind people release when a knot finally untangles. "Looks ready," she said. "If the engineer wants, he can blow the whistle." She tapped the table twice in a high, soft rhythm, just air and suggestion, no pressure. Fiberglass ifted his gaze, not all the way up, but enough for sunlight to catch in his irises. He pressed his lips together and made no sound. Then he tapped the table once, almost shyly. Clara answered with a tap of her own, a heartbeat later, higher in pitch. Evan's hand hovered. Then he placed the second dot of ketchup perfectly between the first and the little ramekin lighthouse. As if stitching the path closed, something moved across his face, quick, almost imagined. A quiver at the corners of his mouth. It passed like a bird's shadow, then returned, small but certain. A smile. Not wide, not for show, a private smile, the kind a child saves for their own delight when the world finally aligns. Grant felt the room quiet inside him. He had not realized how loud he had been, even when he said nothing, how his mind kept shouting orders at absence. The smile knocked the breath out of him in the gentlest way. He wanted to speak gratitude and could find no words that didn't sound like contracts. So he lifted his coffee and sipped, buying himself a moment, and let the warmth tell him what to do next. Stay. To him for praise. She took a step back, hands folded around her order pad. "I'll check on your soups," she said. "We have tomato basil today. It behaves nicely with grilled cheese." When she walked away, Grant found he didn't follow her with his eyes the way he might have in a boardroom, tracking an asset across the floor. He watched Evan instead. The boy took a cautious bite, chewing with the kind of focus that would have humored the most exacting chef. Crumbs flecked his fingers. He didn't wipe them away. He returned to the rails and adjusted a fry by a breath. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past the window. A man at the counter laughed, low and easy, at a joke the cook must have told for the 100th time. The jukebox stumbled into a chorus everyone pretended not to hum. Ordinary persisted, patient as weather. Grant's phone pushed once more against his ribs. He didn't move. It could howl itself hoarse. He was not leaving the table. He laid his palm near Evan's plate, close enough for the boy to notice, far enough not to crowd. Evan tapped the wood twice, a tiny summons. Grant answered with a tap of his own, clumsy but earnest. Clara returned with the soup, set it down with a paper napkin shaped into a small flag, and nodded toward Grant's jacket pocket without breaking the spell. "You're doing great," she said, and then, almost teasing, "both of you." Grant allowed himself a breath that went all the way down. The soup's steam fogged his lenses for a second, softening the edges of the room. He blinked the glass clear and found nothing had sharpened back to its old hardness. The edges stayed kind. Frudga placed the engine fry at the mouth of the red-dotted light and looked at his father's hand again. The smallest smile resurfaced, stayed a heartbeat longer, and slipped away like a secret. Grant felt something inside give, the faintest crack through a wall he had trusted more than any person. He didn't name it. He didn't need to. He only knew that if he reached for his phone now, the track would vanish and the lighthouse would go dark. So he kept his hands where they were and listened to the quiet between taps, as if some long-shut room in him had begun to warm. Rain stitched the diner window in thin, patient lines, softening the street and dampening the lunch rush. Oak Ridge felt quieter than usual. No jukebox, just the hush of ladles dipping into soup and the slow rhythm of a dish towel circling a chrome faucet. Grant and Evan took the booth by the glass, where the light was pewter and kind to tired eyes. Evan traced a fingertip through the condensation on his water, drawing a looping path that vanished almost as soon as it appeared. With a pot of coffee that smelled faintly of cinnamon. "We've got chicken noodle today," she said, voice lowered to match the room. "It tastes like someone's grandmother had a say in it." She hesitated, then added with an awkward care that was gentler than most apologies, "If you ever want something different, something your late wife liked, I can ask the kitchen." The words landed between them like a plate set down without clatter. Late wife. Grant felt a small recoil ripple through his chest. Habit made him brace. Across from him, Evan's hand went still. His lashes trembled, and a clear drop gathered in the corner of one eye, as precise as a bead of rain on the glass. Clara noticed and did the smallest wise thing. She didn't backpedal, and she didn't stare. She placed a napkin near Evan's hand and let the silence hold. "I can start you with soup," she said, barely above a whisper. "And some cornbread?" Grant nodded. His voice, when it came, sounded as though it had traveled a long distance. "That's fine." She moved away, and for a moment the only sounds were the quiet scrape of fork against plate somewhere behind them and the rain's soft insistence. Grant reached for his napkin and folded it, then unfolded it, a man building and unbuilding a bridge he wasn't ready to cross. Evan wiped the lone tear with the back of his wrist and returned to the fog on his glass, drawing a smaller loop inside the first. Grant watched that careful motion and knew they'd been living in a museum he curated. Rooms roped off, names unspoken, music switched off at the wall. He hadn't meant to make grief into a rule. It had just been easier not to break anything. Clara set down the soup and cornbread without commentary. Steam rose in soft curls. "If you want honey, I'll bring it," she said. And then, after a pause that felt like asking permission without words, "What did she like?" "Your Margaret." Here having the name, Evan's eyes flitted the bowl, then to the window, as if the syllables had painted a color he remembered on the gray day. Grant placed his palms flat on the table. The wood felt cool, and under his fingertips, the grain was honest.
"She liked to dance,"
he said, surprised to hear his voice find a doorway so easily.
"Not ballroom. Not really anything you'd name. She'd turn on the radio when she cooked and waltz between the island and the refrigerator like the kitchen was a dance floor that belonged to her."
Clara's smile reached only as far as it should.
That sounds like a good kitchen.
She'd grab my hand if I came in for a glass of water.
He could see the scene without staring at it too hard. The apron she never tied straight, the mismatched socks, the way onions softened and windows fogged.
I'd say I didn't have time. She'd say even a man who signs other people's time should spend some of his own.
The corner of his mouth tilted.
She said, "A billionaire needs a little silly, or he'll turn to stone."
Evan's fingertip drew two small arcs on the glass, then paired them like footprints. The boy's gaze drifted to the salt and pepper shakers. He nudged them closer together until they touched, head tipped in concentration. Clara didn't comment, but Grant saw the way she steadied her breath, how carefully she let the moment be. She sang poorly, he added, the truth arriving with unexpected fondness. Gloriously badly, the kind of off-key that makes you laugh while you're cutting carrots, and then you don't notice you've chopped them too fine. Clara set a tiny cup of honey by the cornbread, as if some memories could use sweetness at the edges. "Did she have a song?" she asked. "Whatever the radio gave her," he said. "She made them all hers." Evan reached for the cornbread and tore off an exact square, then another, lining them like stepping stones on his plate. He tapped the table once, softly, a sound closer to a metronome than a knock. When Clara answered with a light tap of her nail against the rim of the soup cup, Evan didn't flinch. He moved the pepper shaker a half-inch and set the salt across from it. Partners, the smallest choreography. Grant felt the room tip towards something he both wanted and feared. He hadn't let Margaret's name live anywhere but in paperwork and the line on a plaque. Saying it aloud felt like opening a window he'd painted shut. "My wife used to do a little spin when the timer went off," he said, and an almost laugh found him, worn thin with use but still honest. Just once, like a period at the end of a sentence. Evan's mouth softened. The change was so slight it might have been a trick of light. But Grant saw it. A crease at the corners, a whisper of upturn, there and gone and there again. A smile, not for show, not for anyone but the picture in his mind. He placed the two cornbread squares at either side of the shakers and pushed them into a slow, tiny arc. The salt and pepper waltzed, caught Grant's eye only long enough to acknowledge the miracle without frightening it away. "Some kitchens remember the dancing," she said, "even when the music's off. The way people do when appetite is something you coax rather than chase." The soup tasted like Sunday. Evan dipped a spoon and carefully wiped the drip from its edge on the rim. A boy keeping the world tidy enough to bear. When he finished, he arranged the spoon parallel to the knife and rested both hands on the table, palms down, as if anchoring himself. Outside, the rain began to thin. A brighter seam opened in the clouds, and a bus sighed to a stop across the street. Grant realized he'd been breathing more deeply for several minutes without noticing. The familiar tightness in his throat had loosened, not gone, but not ruling him. "Thank you," he said to Clara, though he wasn't sure which part he was thanking her for. The question, the careful honey, the way she hadn't rushed them past a name. She shook her head with a small, practical kindness. "You brought her," she said. "We just set a place." His land looked at Evan's small dance floor of shakers and cornbread, the neat steps across a landscape of china and wood. Something in him softened, the way bread gives under a warm knife. He understood, with a clarity that left no room for defense, that silence had not protected his son, it had only taught the house to whisper around the ache. He folded his napkin once, precisely, and placed it by his plate like a promise to return. As Clara moved away to check another table, he watched her go and felt the unmistakable sensation of a latch lifting somewhere deep inside, a door he had avoided for years easing open on its hinges, letting in air that smelled faintly of rain and cinnamon and the music Margaret used to borrow from the radio. On the executive level of Whitmore Tower, mornings moved like clockwork, quiet carpets, closed doors, coffee that arrived before anyone asked. Victor Hale liked it that way. Predictable floors meant predictable outcomes. Yet in the past few days, something in the building's rhythm had shifted, an almost imperceptible drag in the gears. Meetings slid on the calendar. A standing call with overseas partners was pushed, then pushed again. And on Grant Whitmore's schedule, a new block had appeared, repeating with unnerving regularity, lunch, off-site. Victor stood before the wall of glass that gave him the city. The rain had rinsed everything clean. Rooftops shone like coins. He caught his reflection, a careful man in a careful suit, the kind of face that never made headlines unless it wanted to. Behind him, the intercom gave a polite chime. "Octi, Mr. Hale, legal is asking if we're still greenlighting the acquisition briefing this afternoon." "Terminated, tell them we'll proceed," Victor said, still watching the sky. "And ask compliance to pre-clear the press language." He paused. "Reschedule the CEO prep. Tomorrow." There was a breath of uncertainty from the assistant. "Sir, Mr. Whitmore has moved tomorrow's block as well. It's marked as personal." Personal. The word didn't belong in corporate air. Victor turned from the window and crossed to his desk. The top was orderly, the drawers more so. He had built his career on keeping the company between the rails when storms hit. Earnings misses, hostile rumors, the year Margaret died and Whitmore Tower went half dark for weeks. He'd held the place together then. He'd do it again if he had to. He brought up a dashboard. Travel logs, proxy votes, internal approvals. Data told the truth if you asked the right questions. The truth here was simple. Grant was softening. A CEO who softened rattled investors, and rattled investors looked for steadier hands. And tapped a key and Creen, one most executives never knew existed. Key personnel surface risks. Not illegal, not even improper. Insurance companies used it. Prudent boards requested it. Under new social gravity, a name had been flagged by a junior analyst who noticed patterns most people ignored. Clara Jensen, Oak Ridge Diner. The system did not gossip, it logged. Sightings near the CEO, charges on the corporate card for repeated lunches in the same place when other lunches had gone quiet. Victor read the first summary. Age, enrollment at a local university in special education, part-time employment at the diner. No red flags. He drilled deeper. The second report crawled into family data, public records, not prying, not yet. A father recently out of work. A mother piecing together hours. An adolescent brother with medical needs that did not come cheap. Debt that didn't shout, but did not whisper either. The kind of ledger that kept decent people up at night. He set his palms on the desk and considered the shape of the problem. In his world, there were only two kinds of gravity, the kind that kept airplanes in the air by design and the kind that made them fall by neglect. Grant's sudden devotion to midday presence looked like neglect by another name. A CEO who discovers his heart in the middle of a fiscal year could pull a company into a tailspin without noticing the altimeter. Victor did not hate hearts. He distrusted timing. He buzzed his assistant. "Patch me to Kestrel Risk." A moment later, a voice as calm as a conference room answered. "Kestrel?" "Hale," he said. "Background on a civilian. Clara Jensen. I'm sending the alias fields. Keep it lawful. I want financial pressures, employment stability, any leverage points that could expose the company." "Understood," the voice said. "Purpose of inquiry?" "Standard key personnel protection," he replied, the phrase that satisfied every policy and every auditor. It was also, he believed, true. If someone with needs attached herself to the man at the top, the company needed to know whether the attachment would cost blood or just time. He ended the call and let the office settle around him. On the credenza sat a photo from another year. Grant, Margaret, a ribbon cutting, the sort of staged joy that donors framed. Victor remembered that day with an accuracy that carried no sentiment. The way Grant's hand hovered at the small of his wife's back, the way the board watched him, measuring whether the husband could still be the executive. When Margaret died, Victor had measured out the days, the statements, the bridge loans of patients needed to keep the market from swallowing them alive. He called up the board chair's number and didn't dial. Not yet. You didn't ask for cover until you knew where the bullets were coming from. He returned to the file, Clara was not a storm, she was weather. But weather could erode foundations if you let it run unchecked. An alert chimed.
Kestrel moved fast when Money asked politely. The preliminary dossier unfolded in spare lines. Tuition past due notice on the student account. Overdue utilities at the family's rental. Medical billing activity consistent with long-term therapy. Ambiguous. 2 part-time jobs held in the last year. Stable references. No criminal record. Minimal social media. Reputation locally. Responsible. Keeps to herself. Victor read without pleasure. Responsibility was not the same as harmlessness. Good people made desperate decisions when cornered. Good people could be used by bad ones. Flush steepled his fingers and tested the choices. He could warn Grant, but warnings lately slid off the man like rain off the tower glass. He could go to the board, but that turned smoke into fire. Or he could shape the incentives so that the risk removed itself quietly, painlessly, without scandal or fuss. He had used incentives his entire career. Packages, transitions, Assurances that made enemies into ghosts. The trick was not cruelty. It was cleanliness. He pictured the diner, greaseproof paper, a bell over the door, a young woman pouring coffee for men who tipped with loose change and stories. There were 100 ways to help her family that did not require a billionaire's proximity. There was one way to make sure she took them. Victor lifted the phone again, this time not to a vendor but to one of his own, a man who managed sensitive matters with the same discretion used for elevator repairs and pre-earnings garbage pickups. "Connor," he said when the line clicked, "I'll need you to visit a small place in town, Oak Ridge Diner. Be polite. You're going to ask for a waitress named Clara Jensen." "Message?" Connor asked. "Unjust solution," Victor said. He let the word sit a moment. "She has obligations. We can make those disappear. In exchange, she gives us space." He kept his voice bland, the way a surgeon kept his hands steady. "If she's as responsible as her references say, she'll understand the math." Connor did not comment on math. "Any lines I shouldn't cross?" "Every line," Victor said. "Keep it legal, keep it quiet, keep it kind. But be clear." He set the receiver down and let the silence return. Outside, the city had sharpened into late sun. In the reflection on the glass, a man smoothed his tie and straightened his jacket. It was not triumph he felt, only the relief of procedure. The business of a large life was keeping it from wobbling. A CEO who grows soft, Victor thought, invites the whole structure to sway. He pressed one final button, connecting to Kestrel again for written confirmation. "Send me everything you have," he said, "and keep digging." Restrained the call, then made one more, to the assistant who never failed him. His tone was the same one he used for flight plans and budgets. "Schedule a check-in tomorrow," he said, "and Connor, put him on standby." Candace. There was a beat, the slight intake of someone who understood more than she would ever say. "Dig deep," Victor added, almost gentle. "I want everything about her." Diner exhaled at closing time. Chairs flipped upside down on tables, a bucket rolled, and the floor took on the lemony shine that meant the day was finally over. The neon sign in the window hummed to itself, one letter sizzling, as if even the light wanted to go home. Clara wiped the last booth with slow, even strokes, then folded her rag into a neat square. Her feet ached in the honest way tired feet do. It was a good ache. It meant she had made it through another day. Linda from the register, counting the day's cash with the small, quick motions of someone who had been doing it half her life. "You want me to walk you to your car?" Clara said. "See you in the morning." She slipped her tips into a jar for rent and tuition, the 2 lines that define the month's arithmetic. Jacket on, scarf looped, she pushed the door open. The air outside was cool and smelled faintly of rain and diner grease, salt, coffee, and the memory of something sweet cooling on a rack. A dark sedan idled in the lot with its lights off. She wouldn't have given it a second look if a man hadn't stepped from its shadow the way some men step from conversations they've already planned. "Ms. Jensen." Reluctance was smooth, not loud. Clara stopped, one hand on the strap of her bag. The man wore a coat that didn't mind the weather and a tie that kept its shape. She knew his face from television segments and company newsletters kept behind the counter for regulars who liked to read about powerful people with their coffee. Victor Hale. "To speak," he said, as if the sentence were a courtesy rather than a decision. He kept a polite distance, the way good shoes keep clear of a puddle. "It's late," she answered. Her heart ticked faster, but not from danger, more from the old instinct that tells you when someone has the power to change your day without lifting his voice. "I'll be brief." He held out a thin envelope, cream paper, her name written in a careful hand. "This is for you." She didn't move to take it. "What is it?" "Help," he said. "For your family." The word family landed like a weight in a prayer. Clara's fingers closed around the envelope before she could think of a better idea. It was heavier than it looked, the seal lifted with a whisper. Inside were papers printed on good stock and a card from a law firm that lived in a building with quiet elevators. A simple cover letter used words that were humble and expensive at once: tuition assistance, medical support, stability. There were numbers that would steady any kitchen table in a storm. "Why?" "Because you're a responsible person in a difficult spot." Victor spoke as if reciting a diagnosis. "And because the company I help steward cannot afford uncertainties, this arrangement would secure what you need and knit up what we need." "What do you need?" she asked, though she knew. "A little distance," he said, "from Mr. Whitmore, from his son. Kindly put, you would step away. Someone else, someone without your load, can fill the gap." Clara's breath gathered on the cold air. "You think I want something from them." "I think good people want good things for their families. Your brother's care is not cheap. Your tuition hasn't been paid for this term. Your parents are doing their best on a road with potholes." His tone did not mock. It simply stacked facts. "You've held it together longer than most." She tucked the papers back into the envelope as if they might fly off. "This looks like charity." "Connection. An exit package, Ms. Jensen." Victor's mouth made a diplomatic shape. "No one needs to know you were ever here. It protects them, it protects you." "And if I say no?" He didn't shrug. He let a breath out through his nose, warm vapor in the cool night. "Then the world remains what it is. Bills come when they come. Landlords prefer tenants who never fall behind. Universities release students for balances due. Insurance companies read their policies closely. I don't make these rules. I only know how they are played." He kept his hands visible, not threatening, just tidy. "I am not a villain, Ms. Jensen. I am a custodian. I keep the railing strong. You could take this and make your load lighter by morning. No scandal, no story, a kindness, done discreetly." Clara felt the parking lot tilt a degree. In her mind, she saw the tiny kitchen at home, her mother folding a dish towel twice before hanging it straight, her father pretending the full garbage bag wasn't heavy, Noah humming to himself with a puzzle piece held up to the lamp as if light could help it fit. The envelope warmed under her hand like something alive. "Nia know his son?" she asked, surprising herself. "I know what a son can do to a CEO, Victor said. He can make him soft." "Soft is not the worst thing," she said. "In markets it is." He lifted his eyes toward the diner door, where Linda had flipped the sign to closed. "Your kindness is admirable. It is also costly. This saves everyone that cost." Clara wrapped her hand tighter around the envelope. "You want me to disappear." "I want you to flourish elsewhere." He inclined his head, a gesture almost gentlemanly. "We can finalize tomorrow. There's a number inside. Call it and everything begins moving in the right direction. If you would rather not, that is your choice. But choices have consequences. For all of us." The last sentence was soft, not sharp. Maybe that was what made it colder. He stepped back. The way meetings end when the point is made. "Thank you for hearing me," he said, and returned to the sedan. The engine woke with a purr. The car slid away without looking over its shoulder. Clara stood under the tired neon and listened to the humming letter buzz itself out. The parking lot was quiet. Somewhere, a delivery truck sighed. She opened the envelope again and read the letter by the light that remained. It spoke of relief, of dignity, of not making a burden of one's burdens. It did not use the words price or goodbye, but she could hear them in the margins. The papers back in and hugged the envelope against her chest, as if steadiness could be held like that. The cool air pushed at her cheeks. She felt anger, and she felt gratitude, and she felt the old stubborn courage that had carried her through nights when the numbers didn't add. Above all, she felt the split a person feels when doing the right thing could harm the people she loves and doing the wrong thing could help them sleep. The sign in the window flickered once, then steadied. Clara took a step toward home and stopped, the envelope warm under her coat, the weight of it changing the way her shoulders held themselves. She had never wanted to be in anyone's story but her own. Now, every road she imagined seemed to begin with the same question. She tightened her arms and started walking, the envelope pressed close, as if she could keep all the answers from spilling out before morning. Opened straight into the penthouse, spilling Clara into a room that carried more echo than air. Floor-to-ceiling glass held the city at arm's length. The furniture looked curated to impress silence. Grant stood by the window with his jacket off and his cuffs unbuttoned, as if he'd tried to relax and the room had refused. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice neutral. "Evan's with his nanny." Clara nodded, fingers tight around the envelope inside her bag. "I needed to tell you in person." She stepped forward, steadied herself. "Your COO came to the diner last night, Victor Hale." Grant's eyes flickered. "Go on." "He handed me a package. Tuition, medical support for my brother, help for my parents." She took out the envelope and set it on the glass table, the cream paper a small shock against the dark surface. "In exchange, I walk away from you and Evan. No scenes, no questions." Grant didn't touch it. "Did he threaten you?" "Not in words that could be quoted," she said, "but the meaning was clear enough." He looked past her, out to the blue-black shine of the river. "How would this benefit him or the company?" "It removes me," Clara answered. "It keeps you from softening." The word landed and stayed. Grant's mouth tightened. "Victor has kept this company standing in hard weather. He's careful." He turned at last, studying her with the same clean scrutiny he used for balance sheets. "Why bring this to me instead of accepting it?" "Because it's wrong," she said simply. "Because Evan deserves honesty around him." "Or," he returned, quieter, "because showing me this buys you trust I cannot afford to give." Color rose to her cheeks. "I'm not playing a game. I live in a world where games are the method and sincerity is an opening move," he said. "You appear, my son responds, and now there's an envelope with all the right numbers and none of the rough edges. It's tidy, too tidy." Clara's breath hitched. "Listen to yourself." "I am listening," he said, but his gaze had gone remote, as if he were listening for a flaw in a recording. "Victor has been with me 15 years. He is not a man who makes careless offers. He made this one." Her voice thinned, then steadied, "and he counted on me needing it." He let a long silence stretch. "Can you prove any of this?" Clara's hand hovered over the envelope. "The proof is in how quickly you doubt me." Something inside the room seemed to tilt. She tried again, softer. "Grant, I care about Evan. About you, in the way that comes from seeing you both try. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want it." His numbered and fell. "People want many things." The words found the seam in her composure and pulled. Tears rose, hot and mortifying. "If I wanted money, I would have disappeared," she said, the sentence breaking on the last word. "I would have taken it and saved my family and left you a neat absence." Grant flinched almost imperceptibly, as if struck by a light he couldn't face. He reached toward the envelope, then stopped. The city lights trembled in the glass like a second sky. "Clara," he said at last, her name careful in his mouth. "I need time." She stared at him, damp lashes widening with disbelief. "Time to what? To decide whether I'm real?" He had no answer that didn't sound like cowardice. He turned toward the window, hands sliding into his pockets, the universal posture of a man retreating to higher ground. "I'm sorry," he said, not looking at her. "I can't." She swallowed the rest for him, a small, wounded sound. The envelope waited between them like a verdict neither would claim. Clara gathered her bag with fumbling grace. The room felt colder now, as if someone had opened a door to winter. She took one step, then another, hoping he would call her name, admit doubt in the other direction. He didn't. He kept his back to her, a dark figure cut against a brighter city. The elevator chimed. She stepped inside, the doors whispering shut on the ache of a promise that hadn't been made. Blindness, the phone buzzed so sharply it made Clara drop her keys. Her mother's voice burst through, cracked with panic. "Clara, Noah, the center, there's a fire. They said the sprinklers. Oh God, he's trapped." World narrowed to the sound of her brother's name. Clara's chest locked, her knees almost buckled. Before she could form a response, Grant was at her side. He caught the wild fear in her face and didn't ask questions. "Get in," he ordered, pulling open the car door. The city blurred as his black sedan tore through the streets, light streaking against wet pavement. Clara pressed the phone to her ear, begging for details. But her mother was sobbing too hard to give them. Her hand shook, and Grant's grip on the wheel tightened with each tremor he felt beside him. Ahead, a glow rose against the night. Not the calm glow of neon, but the vicious orange of flames. Margaret Carewing, the place that had always been a refuge, now spewed smoke into the sky. Sirens wailed, firefighters fought the blaze, but water sputtered weakly from half-dead sprinklers. Clara's heart splintered. Somewhere inside, Noah was waiting, scared and small. She turned toward Evan in the back seat, desperate for grounding, and froze. The seat was empty. Her breath caught. "Grant, Evan's gone." Grant slammed the brakes, both of them staring at the empty space where the boy had been, while the fire roared louder down the street. Grant shoved past the line of firefighters, ignoring shouted warnings and the sting of smoke against his eyes. Heat pressed down like a living weight, but he kept moving, his memory guided not by instinct, but by Margaret's voice from years ago. "If you ever fund this building, promise me it will have a second way out. Promise me, Grant." Tightened. The basement corridors were already thick with haze, the exit signs faint ghosts in the blur. He coughed into his sleeve, heart pounding, until his hand brushed the reinforced panel Margaret had insisted on. The secret passage. Salvation, if it still worked. He yanked the handle. Stuck. The steel refused. With a growl, he braced his shoulder and slammed into it. Once. Twice. Pain seared through him, but on the third strike, the mechanism shrieked, buckled, and gave way. The door lurched open, spilling a draft of cooler air. For a breath, only silence. Then, faint and fragile, it reached him. The unmistakable sound of children's voices echoing through the dark. "Help!" Windshield's chest clenched. Evan and Noah were somewhere ahead, alive, but running out of time. The heavy door groaned shut behind him, and Grant stumbled into the sensory room at the end of the hall. The smoke was thinner here, but the air still carried the sting of burning wires and wet plaster. His eyes darted wildly until they fixed on a glow that didn't belong to the fire. In the corner, crouched on the padded floor, Evan held his silver kaleidoscope up to a trembling Noah's face. The fractured glass caught what little light remained and tossed it back as shifting stars, reds and greens and golds, turning the smoke into a galaxy. With one hand, Evan tapped a steady rhythm on Noah's shoulder. Soft, deliberate beats, a pattern of comfort. Noah clung to the toy, eyes wide but locked on the swirling colors instead of the chaos outside. For the first time, he wasn't crying. He was listening. Grant's throat tightened. He moved closer, crouched down, arms shaking. "Evan?" His voice cracked. His son lifted his head. Blue eyes glimmered through the haze. And then, like a key turned in a lock long rusted shut, words slipped out, quiet, raspy, but clear. I helped. The world stopped. Smoke, heat, fear, all dissolved under the weight of that single phrase. Tears broke free, streaking through soot on Grant's cheeks. His boy had spoken, after years of silence. But the walls groaned, a beam above them shuddering loose. Grant gathered both children close, heart split between wonder and terror, knowing the miracle had come at the edge of disaster, and that they still needed a way out. The ceiling split with a deafening crack, sending sparks and plaster raining down. The hallway ahead pulsed with fire, red and merciless.
Grant tightened his hold on Noah, the boy's arms clinging around his neck, while his other hand gripped Evan's smaller one with unbreakable force. "Stay close to me," he shouted, though his voice barely carried over the roar. Evan nodded, clutching his kaleidoscope tight against his chest, his eyes fierce with focus. They plunged into the smoke-choked corridor. Heat pressed at their backs like a living beast, and the floor groaned beneath each step. The hidden passage Margaret had designed was their only chance, but as they neared the final turn, a wall of flame surged across the exit, sealing it in a curtain of fire. Grant's chest heaved. Turning back was not an option. He scanned the hallway, found a sidewall of drywall and plaster. Without hesitation, he set Noah down, pressed Evan close, and braced his shoulder. Pain ripped through him as he hurled his weight again and again into the wall. The structure groaned, then gave way with a violent crash, daylight bursting through and a rush of blessed cold air. Grant shoved the boys through first, then dragged himself out, collapsing onto wet pavement. Firefighters surged around them, hoses hissing, radio shouting. Clara's scream cut through everything. "Grant! Evan! Noah!" She stumbled toward them, eyes wide with horror and relief, as Grant sagged to his knees, his arms wrapped around both children, trembling in the chaos of their survival. The morning light slanted across the hospital blinds, thin and pale after the long night. Evan and Noah slept in adjoining beds, their breathing steady, machines softly beeping in rhythm. Clara sat close, fingers laced around a paper cup of coffee gone cold. Grant stood by the window, his suit still smelling faintly of smoke. On the television mounted high in the corner, breaking news filled the screen. Margaret Care Wing fire. Investigation underway. Reporters spoke in clipped tones, laying out what investigators had uncovered. The sprinkler system hadn't failed by accident. It had been disabled. The words fell like stones in the quiet room. Clara glanced at Grant, her face pale. "The envelope," she whispered. "It wasn't just temptation. It was a warning." Grant's jaw tightened. His contacts in finance had already begun sending him data, shadows of wire transfers and shell accounts. Every thread led back to one man, Victor Hale. The anchor's voice shifted, announcing a live press conference. The screen flickered to Victor himself, standing before a cluster of microphones. His expression was polished, yet his eyes betrayed strain. "I did what I had to do," he declared, his voice sharp. "Everything I've done was to protect Whitmore Enterprises, to save the company from weakness." Grant's fists curled at his sides. Clara's hand reached instinctively toward Evan, though the boy still slept. Knee on the screen, Victor leaned in, his words cold enough to chill the room. "If I had to make the same choice again, I would. The Empire must survive, even if others don't." The camera zoomed closer, catching the glint in his eyes as the feed cut to commercial, leaving only the echo of his justification hanging in the sterile hospital air. The boardroom of Whitmore Tower felt more like a tribunal than a meeting. Long windows overlooked the city, but the table's polished surface reflected only grim faces. Grant sat at the head, his suit immaculate, though fatigue lined his eyes. "Your judgment is compromised," one director snapped, tapping a folder of reports. "First the scandal with the fire, now the press circling. Investors want reassurance, not sentiment." Another leaned forward. "Victor Hale built stability. You've let personal distractions cloud decision-making."
If you won't step aside voluntarily, we will put it to a vote." The words circled him like vultures. Grant felt the weight of years, profit margins, acquisitions, skyscrapers raised in his name, but for once they seemed hollow. He thought of Evan's whisper, "I helped," and of Clara clutching Noah's hand in the hospital. He rose slowly, the scrape of his chair cutting through the tension. His voice, when it came, was steady. "I will not abandon my family to cling to a title. If this empire demands I choose power over my son, then it isn't worth holding." Silence stunned the room. A few shifted uncomfortably, others masked disdain. Finally, a director gathered his notes with a cold snap. "Then you've already lost." He strode from the room, phone pressed to his ear. Through the glass wall, Grant caught a final glimpse, the man's lips shaping a name. Victor. The Oak Ridge Diner buzzed with its usual chatter. Coffee poured, plates clattered. But at the corner booth, the air was charged with something heavier. Grant sat straight, his eyes calm but unyielding. Across from him, Victor Hale leaned back, smirking as if the fire, the scandal, the boardroom whispers were all minor inconveniences he had orchestrated. "You've grown sentimental," Victor said, stirring his black coffee with deliberate slowness. "A man who once ruled by numbers now clings to children and waitresses. Do you know what that looks like to shareholders? Weakness." Grant let the words sit. He remembered Evan's kaleidoscope shining in the smoke, Noah's trembling hand, Clara's steady presence. He leaned in, his voice low but firm. "The very thing you sneer at, what you call weakness, saved my son's life. It pulled him from silence. It gave me something worth fighting for." Victor scoffed, shaking his head. "Family doesn't keep an empire standing. Ruthlessness does." "No," Grant replied, eyes steady. "Family is the only reason an empire deserves to stand at all." The diner seemed to hush as two uniformed officers entered. Their gaze swept the room before locking on Victor. One approached, laying a firm hand on his shoulder. "Victor Hale," the officer said, voice clear and final, "you need to come with us." Clara, from her quiet seat nearby, exhaled for the first time that night as Victor's smirk finally faltered. The children's playroom smelled faintly of crayons and disinfectant. Sunlight spilling through pastel curtains, Evan sat cross-legged on the rug, a small pile of wooden blocks before him. Clara knelt nearby, her hand gently resting on his shoulder, offering no instruction, only presence. Slowly, deliberately, Evan aligned the blocks, one letter at a time. F, A, M, I, L, Y. He paused, then gave a small nod, as if to confirm the word was complete. Clara's eyes brimmed. Grant, standing just inside the doorway, felt something inside him break open. The rhythm that once existed only in Evan's tapping had become words. Clear, undeniable. Evan looked up at Noah, who watched with wide eyes, then nudged a spare block toward him. Noah took it, shyly adding it to the line. Evan laughed, a sound light and free, carrying further than any echo of silence. Clara covered her mouth, her smile trembling. Grant lowered himself beside her, his gaze fixed on the boys. "This," he whispered, voice rough with awe, "this is the real miracle." The room felt full, as if Margaret's memory had settled there too, woven into every shared laugh and every small act of connection. Just then, a nurse entered with an envelope. "For the Whitmore and Jensen families," she said warmly, placing it on the table. Clara opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a handwritten invitation from the local community center. "Please join us for Thanksgiving. We'd be honored to have your families at the table." Grant exhaled, his hand brushing Clara's. For the first time in years, the word Evan had spelled didn't feel like a distant hope. It felt like home. The hall glowed with warm light, strings of autumn leaves draped along the walls. A long table stretched across the room, crowded with golden roast turkey, bowls of mashed potatoes glistening with butter, and the sweet aroma of pumpkin pie drifting through the air. Laughter rose and fell like music, a sound so different from the hollow silences Grant had once known at his own dining table. Posición stood beside him, carefully setting silverware at each place, his small hands moving with quiet precision. Grant guided him gently, not correcting but sharing the task. Across the room, Clara laughed softly with neighbors as Noah tugged at her sleeve, eager to show her the cranberry sauce he had helped stir. When the food was served, voices hushed for a brief moment of thanks. Evan's gaze traveled the table. Then he lifted his hand and tapped a playful rhythm against the wood.
The sound was simple, almost shy, but it drew smiles, then chuckles, until neighbors picked it up, clapping the beat with joy. The hall filled with rhythm, not of isolation, but of belonging. Grant felt his throat tighten. He reached across the table, his fingers closing over Clara's. Her hazel eyes met his, steady and bright. "We have a new family now," he whispered, the words almost swallowed by the laughter around them. Clara's smile widened, and Evan leaned into his father's arm as the rhythm carried on, blending into the music of a life remade, one where love had become the empire worth protecting.